Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for the first of three of these sessions. So I'm James Green. I head up the data analytics and AI practice at Ancoris. Been working with data for a long time now, almost 20 years. So lots of experience, enjoying both kind of big data, AI, and of recent note is the work I've been doing with GCP. So just to set the scene a little bit, so we're talking about, in this particular session, we're focusing on this part of our modern approach to data analytics. So in this whole diagram here, we've got all the different kind of data sources that we typically find in clients, and hopefully these will resonate with you. Here we've got, this is the actual data warehouse platform. So we use Google BigQuery, and we'll be talking about that. And then this process here, so everything in this pink box is really the process of ingesting the data into that data store. Okay, and then the final piece is transforming that data using, and we use a product called DBT, and we'll be showcasing that. And we'll be talking about some of the pitfalls, some of the recommendations, how you get started. In the second session, we'll be looking at ML. Particularly, we'll be covering products like BigQuery ML, so it allows you to write ML using SQL. We'll be looking at Cloud Auto ML, so that's AI training AI, which is pretty cool. We'll be looking at more traditional data science using kind of Python AI platform notebooks, and then we'll be looking at the kind of the high end, if you like, but also high complexity, which is TensorFlow. So that's session 2, and then session 3, as I mentioned before, is 90 minutes on Looker, so kind of a deep dive on Looker. Alrighty, so at this point, I was actually going to hand over to Gethin. Gethin's just going to talk to you a little bit about Sigma Sports and just give you a kind of an overview of who they are. So over to you, Gethin, please.
Thanks, James. Yeah, so Sigma Sports, we started off as a mail order business back in 1991. We then sort of started moving into we've had a key Halo store in Hampton Wick, which is just in Kingston, so southwest London. And then as we've sort of built and grown the business, we saw that there's a huge potential for our e-commerce offering. We launched our website in 2012. We've just gone through incredible growth over the last 8 years since then. So we've been in the Times top 200 fast track growing companies. We've also just secured at the back end of February a new minority investment with a company called Primary Capital to help us sort of improve the processes and grow the business even further. So very exciting time, and obviously during the pandemic, it seems to be the most popular thing that everyone wants at the moment is to go out and exercise, which is great for our business. And we also pride ourselves on not being able to offer that high level premium customer service is a key attribute for us as a business.
Great, thanks, Gethin. And that's interesting actually. And we'll touch on this, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit on how the pandemic has affected you. So have you seen kind of changes in buying or perhaps customer behavior as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually traditionally, if you were to look at us as a business back in 2018, we were sort of sized at being apologies, always typical background.
Sorry
about that. It's always the way. It's never straightforward, these calls.
Yeah, no one whistle, all right?
We started in 2018. We would definitely sort of cater towards a more premium customer focus. So sort of average price point bikes about $3.5 grand going out to customers, and very much that was based upon store. So we weren't seeing anywhere sort of the volume from an e-commerce perspective on bike sales. Whereas now, I think a lot more of our customers are happy and understand the service we offer and getting that across the board. But then also, actually, we've seen that we're gaining that customer a lot earlier in the funnel than we used to. So there's a big part now over the next year to see if we can understand our customers just a little bit better than we might have done traditionally, sort of resting on our laurels of how good our current customer base was. So really exciting times.
Great. Thanks for sharing those those insights. And I think this is interesting. Again, probably Gethin, it'd be good maybe if you wouldn't mind just talking through some of the data sources that you have in Sigma. And I noticed on the registration we've got quite a lot of retailers. We've got Sainsbury's. I noticed on here. So there's a number of retailers, and a lot of these will be relevant. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind just kind of covering, yeah, what are your kind of data, I guess, the source of your data look like, Gethin?
Yeah, sure. So we have all our sort of raw transactional output comes through from a third-party business called Fivetran Commerce. So they manage effectively our front-end website as well as the transactional stuff in the background. So any sort of reporting and that sort of thing sort of managed on that end. We pride ourselves on our social presence, so we utilize a lot. We create a lot of our own content throughout the business. So we're using Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, particularly to help sort of build our audiences, create brand awareness and a community, and that we find that's a really vital part of our sort of business strategy to make sure that we are sort of the go-to educational piece from a person who's looking to get into cycling going forward. And then, yeah, we also, from a marketing perspective, we utilize Google Analytics. It's been a platform that we've used since I can remember being in the business, and that's been vital in sort of gaining tracking. Obviously, things are looking to change through to GA4 now, so there's some complexity on third and first party cookies, which will be an exciting part of figuring all that stuff out. But and then we use Ametria as our sort of CRM provider, so that looks at how we create our audiences. But yeah, as you can see, everything is spread so vastly across the business that we actually are looking to. We were just scratching our heads on how do we centralize this, and actually how do we gain any meaningful data from all these different sources in different areas.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. And I think that's probably a challenge shared by a lot of organizations, even smaller organizations. It doesn't seem to really scale. If you're a small organization, you still tend to have, tens of these different data sources. If you look at someone like Sainsbury's, who I did some consulting with, you can times that by 10, 20. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. All right. Thanks for that, Gethin. Then I guess, so what we're going to talk a little bit around here. So if you look at someone like Sigma Sports, now from our perspective, and we'll turn this over to Gethin again for his view. But if we were to look at this as kind of like a consultancy, why would someone like Sigma, why would a retailer invest in in a modern data warehouse? So some of the typical value add that we're seeing, so is understanding customer acquisition, retention and churn, specifically important with things like big events like COVID. Like how are these patterns changing? Segmentation of customers, including things like lifetime value, and that includes a machine learning aspect to that. So predicting a customer who's maybe only made one purchase with you, what their lifetime value may be over the course of their lifetime with you. So, and you can use that to for example, increase marketing ROI. And then we look at things like optimizing the product buying and supply chain, cash flow optimization and forecasting. And this one's actually quite specific, which is, maybe you could talk about this one as well, Gethin. This one is specific to you in terms of this customer support ticket intention classification, which is quite an interesting use case, perhaps a not so obvious one. But yeah, how did you feel about do you want to talk a little bit about your journey, I guess, Gethin? What made you, or what were some of the reasons why you chose to invest in data? Yeah,
sure. So to be really blunt about it, it was complete business necessity to start off with. So we, as sort of stated earlier, we came into a round of investment. So we had pools of clients looking to access the data needed to sort of do their corporate due diligence. And actually, our reporting probably at that point in time was fairly rudimentary. You were looking at, if you wanted to run a business case as granular as every customer order, product transacted across a 5 or 6 year period, it wouldn't be possible to run. And even then, for someone to then wrangle that data and get meaningful insight out of it, would be near impossible. So yeah, it was vital really that we needed something that the people doing the due diligence could have easily access to, using something like SQL to sort of able to wrangle it and mine it for what they're after and the insights they need. And actually, you know, from my end, before, as you know, I'm sure a lot of people would have gone through when the pandemic initially hit, we were a little bit concerned about where the business was going to do. Fortunately for us, it's gone the right way. But we, you know, in order to sort of mitigate risk, a lot of the staff, including myself, were put on furlough. So I thought I'd use that time freely to get some training and understand, you know, tools and stuff that might benefit the business. And one of that was looking at GCP, and I think I was using Coursera as a resource, but it's incredible how much resource Google has to get people to understand the products they're using. And I thought that was really impressive. And actually, as I came back off of it, it made me as a key member of staff, and helped me I was able to facilitate that, get that data over for our due diligence process. And out of the back of it, we now have secured that investment. So that was really promising. But we saw from that, and that was just, I think that was literally just getting a solid SQL database working.
Yeah.
It was a sort of a blue sky. I thought, well, imagine how much we can gain off of this small database. What can we do if we start joining everything together and bringing that data centrally into the business and making that our source of truth? So that was the really exciting point of it. But I knew myself, I didn't have the level of expertise to be able to wrangle that and manage that myself. So I've heard of Unchorus, and through actually a friend of mine, and he sort of set the conversation up, and we built it from there. And it's been a really great experience working with you guys in centralizing that data and building those pipelines out.
I guess some people won't appreciate or maybe be aware. So things like Google and the other platforms offer this as well. There's a really generous free platform. So, and Getty, you might want to talk about that in terms of, you know, that initial, when you started exploring things like BigQuery, and we'll be covering that. You know, so Google will give you, I think it's $300. Is that right at the moment? So they'll give you $300 to spend on consumption-based products across the whole suite, and you get the full-blown product. It's not like you get some, you know, slimmed-down version. Did you find that useful, Gethin? Did you kind of make use of that any of those free tiers when you kind of started exploring?
Yeah, exactly that. When I was on my furlough leave, it was great that I signed up on a personal email address to get that credit, and you know, it's great. It's a readily available pot. So I was using not just BigQuery as an example, but stuff like Cloud Data Prep, understanding cloud storage to a better degree. Yeah, it was a really great tool in just being able to just, you know, you weren't mitigating any risk or cost yourself, which, you know, as someone spinning up a database or making a query slightly incorrect, you go, oh my God, how much have I spent here? And I have got the money to cover that. But actually, as well as that, you do find that GCP's costing is really, really competitive. And yeah, you can spin up ridiculous amounts of data for a query, and it costs you virtually nothing. It's really, really, really impressive. I was really surprised by that.
Okay, that's interesting. All right. Look at someone like Sigma. So they've identified that they want to build this modern data warehouse. Now, as Gethin kind of talked through there, he's kind of stumbled across Google, I suppose. He explored some of the free products. He liked what he saw, and they're now on that platform. For some of you, you might be, you know, comparing against Snowflake, Azure, etc., which is all fine. You know, that's a common process that we see. But the thing that you'll share is that for many of you, you'll just be faced with this, you know, very siloed data sources, right? And you kind of know in your mind that you need to get it into a warehouse. But I guess it's how do you do that is the first question. 101 different ways, and there's probably 101 people that will tell you which is the best way. They will all be different. And so what we're going to do here is kind of talk about some of those processes. Now, I'm jumping forward a little bit. This is looking at what we built, or are in the process of building with Sigma. So Gethin's actually building this with us, as opposed to us just delivering it for him. So in Gethin's case, so they're ingesting all of this information, streaming it into Google BigQuery. They're using dbt for all their data transformations. They're then streaming this into an analytics layer. So they're using Data Studio. So Data Studio is a free tool that ships with GCP. So it's a visualization tool. So they've got some pretty powerful charting kind of solutions in there. They're looking to explore Looker. So Looker really takes Data Studio, you know, onto that next level. And that's where we're kind of in discussions with them at the moment. And then the idea is really important is visualizing this information, so presenting it to key stakeholders, and then being really clear about the action that that stakeholder takes in order to, ultimately to optimize that business, whether it be, buying products or, customer acquisition or targeted marketing, etc. So this gives a kind of an overview of what we're delivering for Sigma. And I guess the first stage of that process is that we think is you've got to choose where you're going to store this stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about that idea of centralizing your data. Now, BigQuery is Google's modern hyperscale data warehouse for the cloud. Now, for some of you that might know, say Azure is equivalent to SQL DW, AWS, Redshift, and then you've got some other competitors coming out now like Snowflake. Now, for those of you that are on-prem, you might be running SQL Server on-prem or Oracle on-prem. This is what a traditional data warehouse will look like, and I've worked with these for many years, and I have to explain to the younger guys, well, particularly like Bailey sat here, he doesn't understand what a DBA is, so I have to explain to him that 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, and even now, for those of you running on-prem, you're having physical servers running these data warehouses, and you'll have a team of people, DBAs, administrating those warehouses. They're basically keeping them alive, and they're doing all this kind of stuff like monitoring, performance tuning, index rebuilding overnight, resource provisioning, etc. And the actual value add, the insights and analysis, is only a very small portion of that. And some of you will probably be able to relate to that. But yeah, I just find it funny that the likes of the new people on the block don't even appreciate some of the pain that either we've gone through or are going through, which I always find amazing, really. If you look at something like BigQuery, it's completely serverless, and you can spin up a BigQuery instance. It takes about 5 seconds, and you've got a BigQuery instance, and it's completely managed for you. There's zero setup, there's zero configuration, even unlike some of the other cloud providers like Redshift, where you have to configure and size it and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, BigQuery, you just kind of turn it on, and you can't even tune it. Now, I came from a SQL Server background, and that made me really nervous because I'm thinking, well, what happens if a query's slow? Surely I need to put indexes and stuff on it. But I found with experience, this thing is so fast. I'm actually going to do a bit of a live demo for you in a minute. This thing is so fast that you just don't really need to worry about performance, which for me and probably a lot of you on the call will be a big pain point. You might have nightly rebuilds that creeping up to 8 hours, then 12 hours, and you're worrying about scale, and all that stuff just kind of disappears. So that's BigQuery in a nutshell. Johannes is going to come up and do a bit of a live demo for you, and what we're going to do, we're going to get quite topical, all the stuff that Elon's been doing at the moment with crypto. We thought we'd do something sort of linked to that. So Ethereum, for those of you who don't know, is a cryptocurrency, is equivalent to something like Bitcoin. Google has a load of public data sets which are free to use, and one of those public data sets is they have all the Ethereum transactions near real time. I think they go down to about 5 minutes ago. And we've got a table, pretty large, 1.1 billion row. For size, 530 gig, which is probably bigger than a lot of data warehouses on-prem in their entirety. And we're going to be using Google BigQuery in its default out of the box, which is 2,000 slots. A slot is just a measure of computation. And you can have a 1 slot machine, or you can have a 20,000 slot machine. By default, say the one that Gethin was using there when he fired it up and he used his $300 for free is 2,000 slots, and that's what we'll be demoing. So with that in mind, I'm going to just hand over to Johannes, who just talk you through a bit of the BigQuery UI, and then do this demo.
Yeah, let me do this. Oh, how do I?
Oh, we got a
sorry.
sanitizer gel.
I'll make sure that I do this. Whatever. Oh yeah, here it works. Okay, sorry. So I have the great pleasure to demonstrate this incredible tool to you now. It's quite an honor. So here you see, it tells you before you run a query. So we're not running anything, right? We just have this highlighted. it tells you actually how much it will run. And so this query will run 531.3 gigabytes. So I'm not going to run this particular one. I'll show you another one. But you can see here this beautiful interface. You have your data sets here, and then you have underneath the data sets there will be some tables there. And those are basically the tables that have all the data in it. We have also in BigQuery, which is really interesting, they have Google has basically curated a bunch of data sets that are really interesting. For example, this crypto Ethereum one, but a lot of other ones, and they're already available, so you don't have to even pay for storage. They're just there. You can run queries right out of, just anyone can do that. You can just go to BigQuery right now and run these queries that I'm about to run, and you can see for yourself that what I'm doing here is entirely kosher. So here we were going to run this one, and this one here, as you can see, has a lot fewer gigabytes to run, actually a little bit more than 10%. And that is because we're limiting here, this limiting clause here, that gives us the top 10, because we're ordering it in descending. Descending. So what we're looking here is the total amount sent per sender. So from address, right? So we're looking at all of the different senders that are sending Ethereum coins to others for some transaction, and we're ordering them in descending order, and we're going to have 10 of them. That gives us top 10 of them. So we are not. Let me just make sure that we're not using caching. So if you go here, so I don't want to cheat, right? So we can see, you see, use cached results. I'm going to unclick that so that you can see. Where? Oh, this. Yeah. This one.
Just go back and do that again.
Sorry.
Yeah, he's got a head save.
Oh yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah,
I see.
And although we've got that limit in there, this is still doing a full scan across those 1.1 billion rows. So the reason why the scanned is a little bit less, or 10% of the full size, is it's only scanning certain columns. So there we've got that from a class total send. But if you imagine this is still doing, if those of you are from SQL Server land, this is effectively doing a full table scan across a 1.1 billion row table. So just to give you like an idea, so if you imagine in your head how long that would take on your SQL Server,
yeah,
and then maybe compare.
So yeah, you can make some guesses right now before I run it. And think to yourself, how long do you think this will take? And let's do it now. Here it is in action. It's running right now. And we will see that this will give us some results pretty quickly. Here we go. It took 18.2 seconds to run this query with the 2,000 slots, as James has said before. So now let's look at some other queries. This one here. Oh, we looked at this one already. I'm gonna look at this one here. Okay, so this one is interesting because we are limiting it to a timestamp. So we're saying that we want this timestamp to be bigger than the 1st of January 2021, right? And you'll see that this actually drops the amount of gigabytes that we're running quite a bit, because this actually is basically partition. Thank you. Yeah. I was looking for that word. Partition. Right. So it's partition. So that means it only will query. So this will not run a full table scan, but it will only run data that's it will only run over data that is old, newer than since January. So again, should I run this?
No. Well, you can if you like. I guess the key thing to emphasize here was the kind of partitioning strategy. Yeah. So if you have enormous tables, often we're dealing with kind of 50 billion row tables.
Yeah, right.
As long as you, that is one performance tuning area, and it's more it's as much for cost tuning as it is for performance tuning. We'll speak a little bit about cost in a minute. But
yeah, so this is really important, right? So if you have a huge data set, you don't want to run the whole table every time, right? If you're always looking for things in the last month or something like this, if you only look at, if you're always interested in things that happened in the last month, you just need to run this over data since then. think that pretty much covers it?
Yeah.
Okay. Hand you back to James.
Thanks, Johannes. Just while I use this, I mean, Gethin, how did you find? I don't think actually, Gethin, did you work with any kind of data bases before you used BigQuery, or?
Yeah, I was chatting about this the other day. So actually, when I was doing I did a computer science and maths degree, and then decided at the end of it, it's like, oh, I'm not tech savvy enough to be able to pursue this as a full-time career. And actually, my SQL database things was one of my poorer modules when I started. But yeah, actually getting back into the swing of this stuff again, it is a lot more refreshing. And I think like what the best thing about BigQuery is that the user interface and just the feedback you get on a query if mistakes are made, which is, anyone who's done any sort of scripting, regardless what language it is, will come into an issue where there's a comma missed or a bracket missed, or how it's segmented, like all those sort of issues that can drive you absolutely crazy. But Google actually manages that really well, and that made my experience of it a lot better compared to I was looking at things like MongoDB and the sort of database, and that user interface just made it so much easier to manage compared to other ones that I was looking at the time.
Cool. Yeah. So as Gethin mentioned there, so for example, I just put a typo in there, and you can see it's even auto suggesting what column I mean. There's full IntelliSense on here, but often people just use their own IDEs, whether you use like DBBeaver or something. You can just connect in with this, so you don't have to use a UI. One last thing I was just going to mention, if you look at execution details on the bottom here, it's a bit like it gives you an explain plan. So again, if you're SQL Server based, you'll understand what that kind of means. Key thing to look at here is this slot time. So slot time is basically if you were to run this on a single slot. So remember we're running this on 2000. So that query that Johannes just ran consumed 50 minutes. So it would take just over 50 minutes. You can see the parallelism of BigQuery with those 2000 slots, the way that's brought that down to 18.2 seconds. Okay, it's going to go back to this. Size 100%. My laptop's not charging for some reason, by the way. Oh, you have a look. All right, so okay, let's go. Yeah, so slot time there was 48 minutes. Around approx, and the execution time 13 seconds. The last time we ran this, that actually ran for 18 seconds. So that was to give you an idea. Now, just it's helpful for people, I think. Especially you'll hear like Google or Snowflake. They'll talk about hyperscale, and we don't really know what that means sometimes. We thought we'd try and put a bit of color around that for you, a bit of an example. So, for one client, we use BigQuery ML, which is basically using machine learning. Building machine learning models, but using the power of BigQuery to do that. So you write them in SQL. And we'll be covering that in the next session. Now, what we specifically did for this client, we built a recommendation engine for them. So very similar to something like Netflix that's showing you what to watch next. That's exactly what we built for them. Now, the slot time that model consumed was 53 days, which is like insane. So if you think, to run that on a single slot, you'd have to go away, go on a bit of a sabbatical and then come back and you get your answer. Now, we ran that with only 500 slots because we were running it daily. And that brought that down to 2 hours. And that cost £29 per run to build that recommendation engine. And when you talk about some of the people, internally to Google, we were having a chat with one of the guys who's very kind of almost like the owner of BigQuery. When he was working for on-prem, people like IBM, to spec up similar machine, he reckons we would be about $500 million. So if you think about trying to build an on-prem stack to do this, and I can just run this for $29 per run. So so that's kind of what when we say hyperscale, hopefully this will give you a bit of an example of what that means. So we talked about centralizing in terms of picking a platform. Now the next challenge is, okay, you've got to get that data into that platform. Now, if we go back to Sigma, so Sigma had the similar challenge that you guys will have, lots of different data sources. They know they want to get it into BigQuery. How do they do that? Now, at this point, I'll give you a clue on what they did. They used a product called Fivetran, which we'll talk about. But I mean, Gethin, hope you're still there. In terms of how did you always interesting, how did you approach this piece? Because this is pretty cool in that you actually kind of did this yourself, right? You managed to get all of this data into BigQuery yourself.
Yeah. So actually, it sort of came about because this was sort of prior to us working with Ancoris, and we were going down the sort of final stages of the getting our new investor, and there's a new due diligence piece sort of towards the end of that process, and they were wanting some way to connect to Power BI as their sort of infrastructure, which completely hand on heart honest, had no idea how that was going to work. So as I'm sure everyone does, it's a little flick onto Google and see what the best way was. And actually, in the initial stages, we used a platform, a warehouse called Panoply, which actually, in terms of the costings, like just as James said there, way more expensive. But there was a free trial, and I was like, for the sake of the due diligence, that'll work, and that's the most cost-effective way for us. So we linked it with Fivetran. You get like a 7-day sort of window of ingesting, so that helps them sort of compute how much their ingestion rates will cost to sort of store and house and transfer. And yeah, it was literally just signing in, setting up an account, asking what you wanted to get to, like literally click of a button, and it was done. I was quite blown away because I was trying to, even just doing some internal process, I couldn't get my head around it all. But the Fivetran user interface is really seamless and straightforward. I was very impressed with that piece of kit, and it was great. Now you can manage the multitude of connectors that we've got, sort of, as you can see there, and many more FTPs, whatever, I can't remember, it's over 500 different connectors. I think, James, you might know better than myself.
Yeah.
But it's unbelievable. And, cost of a data engineer exactly isn't cheap. And this whole data warehouse and data science section of our business is such a new aspect. We didn't want to be spending a lot of, in terms of new resource, when actually there's a really good software system in place. And actually the best thing about it is once you sign it up, it's up to Fivetran then to manage. So any issues if there's any issues in terms of getting data through or processes, they investigate it. It's managed by them completely. So you can just, there might be prompts that you might have, which is really good as well. I really like how that is, and they prompt you to say, this thing's not filtering, or certain amounts of data is not getting through, and as you investigate it. But yeah, it's a really, really, really great tool, and I think we'd continue to look into use that going forward.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Gethin. Yeah, so as Gethin kind of covered there, so he's using a product called Fivetran. I only discovered this actually a few years ago. It's quite a modern platform, and quite a modern idea that a lot of companies are. Maybe they've invested in a lake, which I still think is a data warehouse. It's just, it's big scale. So then maybe they're streaming in Google Analytics, which might be millions or billions of rows per day, which you can now easily do. How they do it is very different. So a lot of organizations, they start investing their precious budgets in data engineers, and not to knock data engineers, but they're kind of only, if you think of like the factory model, which is what we use, they're only like delivering the raw materials into the yard. So they're dropping the aggregate, they're dropping the bolts, right? They're not making the McLaren. You still got to do that. You're not gonna sell much if you just got a load of sheet metal and components. But you give me a P1, and suddenly I've got something that's really high value. And that's the way that we kind of look at this. Is we would always advocate for organizations, A, for speed of delivery, and B, for basically for cost, is use products like Fivetran. There's other alternatives out there to really accelerate just getting that raw data in. You can hook up to, as Gethin, I think the number's above 150 connectors now. If I flick to this slide, this gives you some examples of ones relative to retailers. So we pulled a few out here that most retailers they're going to do. So marketing. It's got most of them on there, even got TikTok on there, so some of the new players. You've got kind of project management, finance, CRM, analytics, and then all your kind of databases, whether it's on-prem and cloud. So, yeah, and a lot of these are really complex, which my colleague Bailey will kind of show you what we mean by complex. So you could really have a cottage industry if you're not careful of data engineers, as I say, just dropping those nuts and bolts off into the yard and not actually spending time crafting that P1. So, it's a little just a quick overview on Fivetran, really. So the idea is it sits between your data store, that could be Snowflake, BigQuery, and your SaaS providers. And you, as Gethin mentioned there, you literally just authenticate. So if I want to bring, say, Freshdesk data in, I just have to go into Fivetran. This is what the UI looks like. Create a new connector, authenticate with my Freshdesk using my credentials, and I just choose how frequent I want it. And then you can drop data up to 5 minutes, which for all intents and purposes really is near real time. Typically we do that, hourly or daily, kind of depending on what the value is with the time to insight piece. But yeah, really quick, and it will do an initial sync. So it will sync all the historical data, and then it will just manage all those deltas for you. And you get, as Gethin said, really clean, easy to use UI, really transparent alerting. You can alert to, Slack channels. We have it on email mostly, but if you're using Slack, it will send to Slack as well. Yeah, so we really like Fivetran. We'd really advocate that as a way to ingest. And I'll also note while we're on this slide, so Fivetran is just one tool, I guess, in the box, and it's not always appropriate to use Fivetran. So, for example, actually the YouTube data that Sigma are ingesting, we're probably going to be looking to use DTS, which has a whole load of mainly Google-owned sources that you can ingest for free, up to on an 8-hour. That's the only limitation with it. If you want it more real time, then you probably want to either build something custom or use something like Fivetran. But say you want to bring that YouTube analytics data in every 8 hours, you can use DTS and it's free. Fivetran charge you per row replicated, so there's potential cost saving there. If you've got stuff in AWS, for example, DTS will bring that in for free. But the idea is, and this will be different depending on what vendor you use, but if you're going to go down the GCP route, this is the kind of decisions that you make. So DTS to bring in anything free, providing that you don't want it more frequently than 8 hours. Stuff like spreadsheets, CSV files, JSON files, you can federate, zero data engineering. You just create a table in BigQuery that can point to a spreadsheet or point to a bucket that has some CSV files or JSON. And when you fire a query at that, real time, it streams that data in. So that's great. We use that all the time. For things like forecasts, we just have people put them in spreadsheets, and then we effectively live link, not spending weeks engineering anything. Fivetran we've covered. For streaming data, so we do a lot of stuff with IoT devices. So we're streaming data off a train if we're looking at kind of trying to predict when that train's going to break down. We'll use Cloud Pub Sub, which is like a message queue, and Cloud Data Flow, which is Google's own kind of streaming engine. So Fivetran's not a Google product, just for clarity there. And then we've got some other options down here. If you like things like SSIS, which is more of like a point and click kind of orchestration tool, then there's Data Fusion, which is Google's equivalent. If you've used Airflow, quite a lot of you will know what Airflow is. So it's produced by Airbnb. It's now open sourced. Cloud Composer is a fully managed Airflow environment. Airflow, you basically write DAGs, which are basically Python code using Python connectors and sensors. And our general rule for Cloud Composer is kind of if you've got a really difficult data source, like we had someone emailing retail numbers in PDFs, for example. Now that's difficult, right? I can't federate, can't use Fivetran. That's where we break out Cloud Composer and use that. Okay, but I guess fortunately in Sigma Sports case, that we've yet to find a data source that I guess falls into the more difficult category. Right, now we're going to look at transformation in this part of it. So you'll hear people talk about data's the new oil, which is it seems to be the common phrase. Now, I'm not going to say that oil doesn't have any value, right? Clearly it does, if you ever watched Dallas. But really, if you think about the oil is the raw data, the real value is when you refine that, okay? So if you think of that McLaren example, the value of those raw components, the sheet metal, the bolts, the carbon fiber, the real value is when you refine that into a McLaren P1. That's a high value item, and it's the same thing with data. Really, the way we look at it, you still need to do this enrichment process. So you still need to combine this stuff and enrich it and produce these high value assets. And to do that, that's where we use a product called DBT to do all of our transformations within BigQuery. And I'll just, before I hand over to Bailey, I'll just do a quick analogy here, and I think this is quite a good one. So I think when you move from on-prem to cloud, so these hyperscales, a bit like if you move from like a small flat in London to a house out in the country. So you suddenly realize you've got this garage, double garage, and you go crazy. And you get all this stuff and you chuck it in great big boxes, and suddenly you can store all this stuff. But the problem with that, and where a lot of companies are struggling with their lakes at the moment, is you can't find anything. So if I say, right, where's the Christmas tree stand, and I stare at that floor to ceiling stack of boxes, I can't find it. So it's the challenges of organizing data assets for easy consumption really haven't gone away, and you shouldn't neglect that. If you do, then you'll be in that kind of issue where you just won't be able to find anything. And Bailey's going to talk now a little bit about this. I'll try and get some juice into this thing, which we try and do. Right.
Thanks, James. So when it comes to organizing your data within BigQuery, we use a multi-layer approach. Inside BigQuery, we separate data into 5 logical layers. The raw layer is optimized for ingestion of those raw materials, so those nuts, bolts, sheet metal, etc., to use the analogy. The archive and clean layers are optimized for storage. Raw layer optimized for ingestion of those raw materials. Archive and clean are optimized for storage. The staging layer is optimized for transformation. So that really is equivalent to your manufacturing process. And your presentation layer is optimized for consumption. So this factory model that James is using as an analogy, the nuts, bolts, and sheet metal is the raw delivery into the raw layer, and the archive layer stores this. In the clean layer, we tidy the data and make various checks for data quality and discard data that doesn't meet those checks. For example, if you have an ID field which is null, then that data won't be useful to us. The staging layer is where our goods are manufactured, and then they come to rest in the presentation layer. This is where our data assets are consumed. This might be by analysts or executives, or maybe a machine learning pipeline. To do all of this processing, we use data build tool, more commonly known as DBT. All of that work, from start to finish, raw to presentation layer, is managed by DBT in a SQL pipeline. Typically, we develop locally using a code editor, but they also have a hosted version called DBT Cloud, which we use for scheduling of our pipelines as well. Pipelines can range from the very simple to the very complex, and DBT figures out the dependencies between tables and views to build a DAG, a directed acyclic graph. And this graph can also be shown to the user, essentially self-documenting, which is a feature with DBT that we absolutely love, and we'll be showing that in just a moment. So here is an example of a pipeline that we recently built for a client, definitely on the complex end. The ultimate goal was to build the object on the far right, which powers all of their day-to-day reporting and marketing decisions. So very key importance, lots of processing and lots of data sources going into this. DBT understands the relationship between models and sequentially runs dependencies, while also parallelizing queries wherever possible. This makes management of these pipelines incredibly simple, ensures data is kept up to date throughout the entire process, and they run surprisingly fast, even in pipelines as complex as this one, due to dbt's ability to parallelize things not dependent on each other. It's important to note that dbt does not interact with your data directly. Rather, dbt is simply sending queries to your data warehouse, in our case, BigQuery. Data stays within BigQuery and is transformed in place. So, why we love dbt? Number one, dbt is SQL-based, so it's accessible to anyone familiar with SQL. SQL skills are prevalent, and lots of people at least have some competency with the language. dbt supports macros to abstract common or complex tasks, which speeds up the development process further. And again, on the point of reducing the need for expensive data engineers, can be done by lots of people. So I haven't touched on macros so far, but they are an incredibly powerful feature of dbt. Boilerplate code can be abstracted away in macros to keep code cleaner and more maintainable. If you have a piece of logic that is reused a lot, just use the macro. Any edits that need to be made are done in one place. SQL also lacks the ability to do procedural logic, but dbt allows you to mix in some Ginger code to fix this gap. We've built some custom macros to allow us to very quickly build these models. Type 2, slowly changing dimensions, training BigQuery ML models, or creating a date dimension, as an example. dbt also offers excellent data engineering best practices, including integration with GitHub, data lineage, like I just showed, and CI/CD pipelines. That means all of the benefits of version control to team collaboration also apply to the dbt models that you write. Pipelines developed in dbt can be easily scheduled and productionized using dbt Cloud, which is the fully managed orchestration service. So dbt Cloud is a very easy to use platform, and scheduling is as simple as saying what tables you want to run and specifying when with a cron job. dbt Cloud is very cost effective. Developer seats are just $50 per month. Typically, we have a few developer seats per project, such as with Sigma. On top of that, dbt CLI, or the local version, is absolutely free. It's just installed as a Python package. We love the dbt support community. So if you ask a question on their Slack, you can be sure to get some valuable insight from another user. Additionally, quite recently, they have a constrained version of Stack Overflow as well to kind of expand the range and ease of answering questions to other users. Finally, don't just take our word for it. dbt is used by some big names such as Monzo the Online Bank, Kickstarter, and HubSpot. On top of that, when we collaborate with clients, adoption of dbt is very widespread, and we often discover it becomes internally used for further projects as well. I'll now hand back to James, who will discuss how we use dbt in an initiative of our own, Chorus CFO Lab.
So yeah, dbt is something that we really like. One of those game-changing tools, really. And every client so far and every data project we've done, we've advocated dbt, and it's been one of the strong bits of feedback together with BigQuery that they really like. So I really advise you, if you're looking at a tool out there, you know, I would definitely add dbt certainly into the mix to kind of try out. Another nice thing with dbt is it integrates now with Fivetran. It also integrates actually with Looker as well, but we'll cover that on the third session. But if we look at how dbt integrates with Fivetran, just an example. So one of the things we developed internally is a product called Chorus CFO Lab. It's basically a data warehouse following all the things that we talked about so far. It has a looker for analytics, DBT for transformation. We ingest some things like SAP, Sage. The idea is we ingest all these invoices hourly, and then we give the ability for CFOs to get a really good handle on their cash flow, and also to do really complex kind of what-if scenario modeling, and they can tweak the inputs using sheets. So what I was just going to show you is we had a recent client who used CFO Lab, and they had Oracle NetSuite, which is for those of you who don't know, it's an ERP platform, pretty popular. Seen it in quite a few different clients. And so all their invoices, all the money coming in and going out was stored in Oracle NetSuite. Now the table structure that's behind Oracle NetSuite is enormous. There's hundreds of tables. So if you imagine trying to go via an API and data engineering that, yeah, it's going to take a long time. And when it changes, you got to go and fix it. So we use Fivetran to ingest the data. I think I've got here we go. So this is a simplified view. So the client had Oracle NetSuite, all their invoices ever. We use Fivetran to ingest that. So that was fairly straightforward. And then we plugged in Google Sheets is where the CFO can model. For example, they want to model furloughing or new revenue streams. They key all this stuff into Sheets, and then BigQuery would do the calculations. We have some predictive stuff, which we'll cover in the next section. So we were predicting how likely a payment is to actually arrive. So you think you've got money coming in the next 14 days, whereas actually the ML will tell you, no, actually it's going to be late. And then we would publish all this in Looker, and then the CFO would be kind of getting the action and the value. But I guess what I wanted just to emphasize is how that DBT and Fivetran piece works. So we ingested the Oracle NetSuite data. We landed it into BigQuery, into our raw layer, the kind of yard of the warehouse. Hundreds of tables. And if you look, I'm now going to show you DBT. So this is called a model. I'm running it in a common IDE called Atom. Other people use things like VS Code. And this is basically when DBT runs at runtime, it will compile this into a SQL code, into a SQL statement that's executed on BigQuery. In this case, it will create a view on BigQuery. So that's actually what's materialized. You'll notice here that it's 99% SQL. So this is basically a SQL statement. Now, the key value add with that Fivetran DBT integration is this package is a NetSuite Oracle package for DBT. And this model, this SQL, gets me the invoices, and this comes shipped as part of that package. And you can just see here, if I was to try and wrangle this, there's 17 tables. It's highly normalized, which is true for a lot of these SaaS platforms. If you look at SAP, if you've ever looked at SAP, I mean, it's like going into a jungle. There's a lot of tables in there. And Oracle NetSuite is another one of those platforms. So you ingest the data really easily using Fivetran. You're not quite out of the woods, I guess is what I'm saying. But this integration got us really quickly to the point of getting invoice level data, which is what we needed to then plug into CFO Lab. So CFO Lab, hundreds of other transformations in CFO Lab, but they're all sitting within DBT. But the key thing is here, I didn't really have to learn too much about the underlying Oracle NetSuite data structure in order to get what I needed. So it's hard to see feedback on these webinars, but I hope that made some sense. But this was super valuable for us. Okay, now just looking at the time, so we've got about just over 20 minutes. So what we're going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's coming next. I'll maybe go back to Gethin. Gethin, I'll come back to you in a minute, maybe to talk about, I guess, when you got us involved and how that's kind of worked out for you and how we kind of work together. And then we'll open it up to some Q&A on the floor. So just to recap on today, really. So we looked at ingesting data. How do you do it? What kind of tools do you do? Pitfalls, recommendations, real life use cases that Sigma are doing. How to store that. What does BigQuery look like? Some of the pricing. How easy is it to use? How can you get going with it with the free storage? And then transformation. So once you've got that data in, how do you then take that to the next level and get that high value insight? And that's what we talked about, DBT. Next stage, same time next week, we're going to be looking at ML. So, because really cool, kind of exciting use cases that we've been working on, and we'll share some of those with you, show you again how you can really get going with this stuff quickly. I think that's the key. The key thing for you guys is I would advocate is to start now. Don't leave it too late. You don't want competitors that they'll already be all over this. So, start something. Companies like us are always there to help you, but you can see from some of Gethin's experience that you can pretty much get started. I mean, he got started, getting all of those data sources into BigQuery, just off his own back with a little bit of initiative and kind of teaching from some of the Coursera courses. So it's really not that difficult. And then, as I say, final session we'll be looking at, and then this is just a little preview of some of the stuff we'll be looking at next week. So we're going to look at a Sigma sports use case for machine learning, where we're predicting lifetime value of a customer. So they have some really nice bikes. I recommend you all go and have a look. If you're into bikes, go and have a look. Some phenomenal stuff on there. But here we've got an example. We've got Bob and Jane. Bob just buys energy bars, which is not fantastic from Sigma's point of view. Good for loyalty, but not so much good for kind of revenue. There's Jane's, you see she's got a 12. Yeah, so we're looking at this lifetime value use case, and what we're really trying to get to is different people purchasing different products. So from this, it's obviously quite easy to know who's high value, but what about if you just had, what about if you had no purchases and you just had browsing history or demographics, or what about if you just had this, it's training ML to make these decisions for you. So we're covering lots of different use cases. This is just one example. Going to open to questions in three. I just maybe for you, Gethin, I mean, you obviously started out with this and made some really good progress. And then what made you kind of reach out for some help, I guess? That might be useful for people to kind of understand and maybe sympathize with.
Yeah, so from my perspective, it was like any sort of development or coding or structuring of the data. I haven't done that. I sort of went into Sigma Sports actually as a buyer, and my role's evolved as I've been there. But yeah, I haven't done anything in terms of structuring or working with data in such a long time, and that sort of imploded after that initial use case of how important it would be. So it just made complete sense that we needed to leverage support of people who are technically savvy, understanding the products that we wanted to work with. GCP was a choice of ours because of the infrastructure across a lot of other things led really well into GCP. So it made sense that we wanted to partner with someone who was the sort of go-to in terms of expertise for that. And it's just being able to leverage that. And also what's been really great is it's not been just we build you something, charge you a wonderful whacking fee for doing it. It's, you're empowering the business to be able to do that off their back should they choose to. There might be some companies that might want to just have it, you just build us something out of the box and that'll work for us fine. But, I think our Sigma's sort of mantra for the whole time is that we're always a very small business, but we want to, per person, we always want to be as useful or as engaged or as capitalizing on every opportunity as possible. So being able to sort of do this process in tandem with you guys has been fantastic, and using chats to sort of just question things that I might be working on. Like, it's not just been Chorus has gone and built a package and that's it. It's been a really collaborative approach, and we regular communication, which I think has been invaluable, and it's put things into really, we tweak things as we've gone throughout the process, and it's made probably the final product a lot more valuable as a result, actually. So yeah, that'd be my reasons for it.
Okay, yeah, that's really helpful. And just for people's benefit, so the way we work with Sigma, we have, which is quite common actually with clients, we're finding more and more now. So we have 2 90-minute sessions with Sigma a week. So we spec out like a project, what a deliverable looks like, sort of spec out some of those use cases. As Gethin mentioned, what was really important for them was not like the traditional consultancy model where you just deliver a black box and everyone kind of stares at it and hopes it never stops working. Gethin and his team really wanted to be brought along on that journey. So we have these sessions, For example, we've trained Gethin up on DBT, for example. We've got it installed, and yeah, it's fair to say, Gethin, you've been generating models now, and
yes,
feel like you're getting up that learning curve.
For sure, yeah. It's definitely been a learning curve, but I think you guys, it's been really, really helpful having someone just sense checking, just because I know I am not. You wouldn't strike me. I don't strike myself as a software development person, but it does show that actually it is way more intuitive than when I remember when I was doing it back at university. It's a whole different scale. It's really impressive how it's all built on and how much easier it actually is when you've got the right things in place. So that was best practices was something that was super helpful from my end, and has allowed me to sort of carry on doing that work, which is really exciting. And I think everything with the data project, you always go, oh well, you've scratched the surface of something. Oh, we can dig in deeper now, and that's really exciting. And I think the business is really going to benefit from that.
Cool. Yeah, and you're in a position now. You already ingested your own data. We've now empowered you to build those pipelines. And then you've already been using Data Studio. If you progress to Looker, again, we'll give you some training there. But then you'll be able to build those pipelines yourself, completely self-sufficient through start to finish, which is not many organizations will be able to do that. They'll have an army of expensive various different data functions to do that. And we'll hopefully get you on the ML track as well. Let me show you BigQuery ML. We're starting to do that with LTV. We put those pipelines in DBT, so you don't need to go and learn Python or Scala or all these other things that data engineers are doing, or ML engineers. Keep it simple. Just write it in SQL. DBT now. You can put a pipeline in DBT.
Right. Well, I think that we've come to the end of our questions, James.
Okay.
So I don't know if you just want to have a parting word before I do the thank yous.
Yeah, sure. Parting word. Thanks to everyone for attending. I know that everyone's webinared out, meetinged out. Everyone's in the same boat. So really appreciate people taking the time to attend. I really hope you've learned something. That's what I would really love. And I'd really love if this inspired you to make that step. Those of you who are on the start of the journey, or maybe you're part of the way through and you're wondering about pivoting. Yeah, maybe hopefully this has given you some kind of inspiration there. And yeah, really, if you can come to the second one and the third one, then that would be great, because they're just going to. It's all about ML, which is kind of the thing of the moment. So yeah, it would be great to see you there.